G'day and welcome to another battery masterclass. Now in this video, I'm going to talk about lithium batteries and specifically lithium iron phosphate or lithium ferrous phosphate batteries. Of course, this is a huge topic, so I'm going to try and condense it down and focus on those bits and pieces that matter to people using batteries in the outdoor recreation side of things, like fall driving, camping, caravanning, or even using them on boats. In this video, I'm going to compare lithium ferrous phosphate batteries to other types of lithium batteries. I'm going to compare them to AGM batteries, plus I'm going to tell you how to get the most out of your lithium iron phosphate battery and take care of them. First, let's do a really quick comparison of an AGM battery and a lithium iron phosphate battery of the same capacity. These are both 120 amp hours. The AGM battery is around 30 kilos, while the lithium is just 15. If you use both these batteries from 100% down to 0% repeatedly, you'd get about 300 cycles out of the AGM. But in those same conditions, you'd get 2,000 cycles out of the lithium ferrous phosphate. If you're talking about recommended use, generally an AGM is recommended to only use 50% of its overall capacity, meaning you'd get about 60 amp hours out of this battery. A lithium ferrous phosphate's recommended capacity is about 80%, so you get 96 amp hours out of this lithium iron phosphate battery. That's 60% more power. And if you did use those capacities, you'd get about 800 cycles out of the AGM and up to 4,000 cycles with the lithium. They're both sealed and safe to use in your vehicle, and they're both built and tested to withstand vibrations. But it's pretty clear why lithium iron phosphate batteries are becoming so popular. They offer what many consider to be the best balance between safety, power output, and lightweight. Let's go into a little bit of background info on lithium batteries. Lithium batteries come in all different shapes and sizes and all different chemistries. You've got cylindrical cells, pouch cells, prismatic cells, and then you've got bigger batteries that are made up of smaller cells together. Most of the batteries we're all familiar with fall under the umbrella term of a lithium-ion battery. That's ION, not IRON, like a lithium iron phosphate battery. Under that umbrella term of lithium-ion batteries, you've got lithium-ion batteries with a liquid electrolyte, plus you've got lithium polymer batteries or LiPo batteries that use a gel type or polymer electrolyte. But they're both technically lithium-ion batteries because that definition describes how the battery works. Underneath that, you've got all your different battery chemistries, which are achieved by adding different materials or metals into the battery. The most common batteries these days are lithium cobalt oxide, lithium manganese oxide, lithium ferrous phosphate, and increasingly lithium titanate oxide. Plus, there are actually variations on those major players. So you can get a lithium nickel cobalt aluminium oxide or a lithium nickel manganese cobalt oxide. Adding each of these different metals changes the lithium battery that you get. Adding one of these particular metals might increase capacity and make the battery lighter, but it could be at the expense of a battery that's safer and more resilient. So adding a different type of metal might make the battery safer, but weigh slightly more. And you've got to factor into that the cost of some of these rarer metals, plus the supply and demand. Cobalt and nickel are both going up in price because so much of it is currently used for lithium battery production. Lithium iron phosphate batteries work in a similar way to most other batteries, including your typical lead acid AGM battery. They have a positive electrode, a negative electrode, and an electrolyte inside that allows the chemical reaction to happen. It means you can store power and then release it when you need it. The name comes from the fact that the lithium atom is quite unstable and tends to want to lose the single electron that it has in its outer shell. So we're taking advantage of the fact that the lithium ion loses the electron inside the battery. We can then trap those two parts in a state of readiness. They're basically wanting to get back to their original position. The lithium ions have to go through the battery, whereas the electrons go through the circuit. We can take advantage of that flow of electrons to release the power inside the battery. Next, let's take a look at the most commonly used different types of lithium chemistry and compare them on a couple of key points. As you can see here, we've got lithium cobalt oxide, lithium manganese oxide, lithium nickel cobalt aluminium oxide, lithium nickel manganese cobalt oxide, lithium titanate oxide, and last but not least, lithium ferrous phosphate. The first two battery chemistries are pretty commonly used for things like cameras where you need a high amount of power in a small lightweight package. The next two are being more commonly used these days in electric vehicles as they offer a high power output and decent cycle life. Lithium titanate oxide is a fairly recent addition and is gaining popularity because of its massively long life. But as you can see from this table, it's clear why lithium iron phosphate is so good for camping and using in vehicles. While the energy density isn't as high as some of the other battery types, it's not too far off. And while lithium titanate offers the highest safety and the most number of cycles, you get quite low power in return. The lithium iron phosphate battery though is a jack of all trades. It's safe, has a good energy density and power output, as well as a long life and a high amount of possible cycles. When you're talking about small action cameras or lightweight electronics, it makes a lot of sense to use some of those other types of lithium battery chemistries. But when you're talking about a big battery that you're likely going to use in a vehicle, it doesn't make that much of a difference. You're still getting really good power output, many more cycles, but most importantly, adding those heavier iron and phosphate materials means you're getting a much safer battery. Let's now take that last column for lithium iron phosphate and compare it to the currently most commonly used camping battery, the AGM. Yes, a lithium iron phosphate might cost 3 times more than a lead acid AGM, but let me talk you through how they compare over the life of a battery. With an AGM, the further you discharge your battery, the less cycles you get. Discharging all the way to 0% would mean about 300 cycles. Conversely, discharging only the top 10% of the battery down to 90% full capacity may net you around 2,000 cycles. On the other hand, a lithium iron phosphate battery can be discharged all the way to 0% and still get you around 2,000 cycles. So rather than lasting less than a year, or about 300 daily cycles with an AGM, if you used your lithium iron phosphate from 100% down to 0% repeatedly, it could last up to 5.5 years. And if you did only use the top 10% of a lithium iron phosphate battery, like we mentioned with an AGM, it'd probably outlast your vehicle and possibly even you. Lithium iron phosphate and AGM batteries differ in a number of other important ways too. Number one is that an AGM battery is made up of 6 2-volt cells for a 12-volt battery. Lithium iron phosphate batteries can either be made of a number of small cylindrical cells or prismatic cells like this. These batteries use a prismatic cell. There are 4 of these in series to make that 12-volt nominal figure. Each cell is capable of a range between 2.5 volts and 3.65 volts, which in 12-volt terms gives you a range of 10 to 14.6 volts. Perfect for use in your vehicle. Another big difference between an AGM and a lithium iron phosphate battery is self-discharge. AGM batteries prefer to be filled right up and then left on trickle charge to make the most of the capacity. It's almost the opposite with a lithium iron phosphate battery. They don't need to be float or trickle charged, and they'll very happily sit at a low percentage. In fact, if you're storing these batteries, you should leave them at around 50%. Of course, there are going to be more differences between an AGM and a lithium iron phosphate battery, but those are the most important for what we're talking about. And just one final note on that. You might see a lithium iron phosphate battery advertised as a drop-in replacement for a lead acid battery, but they're probably talking about the dimensions more than the use of the battery. For example, you would not want to put a lithium iron phosphate battery in your engine bay because it would be way too hot. One major difference between an AGM and a lithium iron phosphate battery that deserves its own heading is the BMS. Lithium iron phosphate batteries need a battery management system, or BMS, that ensures each of the cells is getting the same amount of charge, they're all balanced, they're all charging and discharging correctly, and that they're within those safe operating temperatures. If you're using a small individual lithium cell, say in a phone or a digital camera, then the charger or the device itself would have built-in protections to look after the batteries. Batteries like these that are made up of multiple prismatic cells have a BMS built in, so they're an all-in-one ready-to-go unit. But some batteries or battery banks do require an external BMS. The BMS is hugely important, and I can't stress this enough. The cells in a lithium battery are quite often capable of doing much more output and input than the BMS allows, but the BMS is there to protect them. This 120 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery is capable of 100 amps charge, 100 amps discharge, and 160 amps peak discharge. If you're looking at a 100 to 120 amp hour lithium battery that only allows 30 to 50 amps of input and output, there's a good chance the BMS is the limiting factor. It may be a lower quality or lower rated unit, and that could be to disguise a couple of things. For example, lower quality, lower output cells, or the fact that the BMS may not have all the functions it should, and by limiting that input charging current, the batteries are never going to get hot enough to get damaged, so why do you need a temperature sensor? At the end of the day though, it's probably just cost cutting. In these King's batteries, they have a high quality BMS, and you know that because the 120 amp hour allows for 100 amps input output, and the 200 amp lithium iron phosphate allows for 150 amps input output. And they have those critical functions that are necessary to keep these batteries safe and healthy. Most importantly, the BMS in these batteries will prevent each cell going below 2.5 volts or above 3.65 volts. They also have a short circuit and overload function, plus temperature sensors to prevent the battery from overheating or from charging in cold temperatures. And to ensure the BMS is protected, these battery cases are sealed with an IP65 rating, and the batteries themselves have to pass a vigorous vibration test. The BMS is why you couldn't use one of these lithium iron phosphate batteries to start your vehicle. For that, you'd need a dedicated lithium jump starter. An AGM battery is capable of emergency jump starting a vehicle, so that's something to take into account. You can rely on a good BMS to protect your battery from the extremes of temperature and for charging and discharging, but it's up to you to decide how much effort you want to put in that aids in the longevity of a battery. While a BMS should prevent damage that your battery sustains from being extreme temperatures, you can help it out by keeping it out of those extreme temperatures in the first place. Like all batteries, lithium iron phosphate do not like heat. And while they're a lot better than other lithium ion chemistries, it still helps to keep them within a good range, generally between about 5 degrees Celsius and 50 degrees Celsius. For lithium iron phosphate charging, ideally you'd keep your battery temp below about 40 degrees. In one study, the same cell, when fully discharged and charged over and over at 15, 25 and 35 degrees, was able to perform about 9,000, 7,000 and 4,500 cycles respectively. So keeping your battery temperature down can make a big difference. At the other end of the scale, your lithium iron phosphate battery shouldn't be too cold. Charging a lithium iron phosphate battery below freezing or 0 degrees Celsius can actually cause irreparable damage. Now your BMS should prevent this, but if you did force charge the battery, it can actually cause the lithium to plate the anode. That increases resistance and permanently drops capacity of your battery. So if you're camping in the cold and your battery doesn't seem to be working or taking any charge, it could be that the BMS has disconnected it to protect it. Lithium iron phosphate batteries should discharge or run your appliances all the way down to around -10 degrees Celsius. But at that point, they will suffer a small amount of temporary capacity loss. -10 degrees is pretty rare here in Australia, particularly where most of us go camping. But if you do live in North America or Europe, it might be worth looking into heated lithium batteries. These use a small heater to keep the cells warm enough that they can be charged and discharged safely. Now that you've ensured your battery's warm, but not too warm, you've got to decide how much of the actual percentage you want to use. Now you can use these batteries all the way from 100% down to 0%, and that will get you around 2,000 cycles. If you decided to only use this battery from say 90% down to 10%, meaning you're using 80% or 96 amp hours of its overall capacity, you could do it up to 4,000 times. And if you want it to be really safe and only use your battery between about 75 and 25%, getting you around half the capacity, you could use your battery 8,000 times. And to tie in with that point, let's take a quick look at a table that compares the battery's state of charge percentage with the battery voltage. In this table, you can see the individual cell voltage and the battery voltage, which is 4 of those cells in series, as well as the charge percentage. The whole range of a lithium iron phosphate cell is between 2.5 volts and 3.65 volts. But have a look at the battery charge percentage. The difference between 99% fully charged and 100% fully charged is almost a volt. Now take a look at the difference between 10% charge and 0% charge, 2 volts. The more often you put your lithium iron phosphate battery into these sort of ranges, the more damage you're going to do long term. So if you do want to get more than 2,000 cycles and a super long life out of your battery, avoid charging it all the way to 100%. Even 99% can make a big difference. But ideally, aim for something like 90 to 10%. That's going to give you plenty of daily capacity, but also hugely extend the life of the battery. And the easiest way to do that is simply to use a dedicated lithium iron phosphate charger or DC-DC charger in your vehicle. That's going to look after the battery and make sure it's in tip-top condition. Finally, let's talk about battery storage. Unlike an AGM that you should really charge completely full and then ideally leave on trickle charge if you're planning to store it, a lithium iron phosphate battery is better left at around 50% capacity. Ideally, charge it up, cycle it down, then charge it up and let it sit at around 50%. Lithium iron phosphate batteries have a very, very low self-discharge. So even if you pulled your battery out after a couple of months, it'd still likely be sitting around the same voltage. And like most batteries, lithium iron phosphates prefer to be stored at a cooler temperature, somewhere between say 10 and 25 degrees Celsius. Hopefully that's given you a pretty good idea of the basics of the lithium iron phosphate battery. There's plenty more I could talk about, but I don't want to overwhelm you too much. Now, if you do want more information on 12-volt setups in four-wheel drives or overlanding vehicles, make sure you check out my 12-volt dual battery masterclass. If you have any questions on lithium, throw them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.